3 years after I passed away, my parents finally showed up at my boarding school. They were only there because Seraphina's kidney condition had worsened. She desperately needed a transplant. They clutched the donor papers, but they couldn't find a trace of me anywhere. When they demanded to know my whereabouts, the teacher scoffed. That orphan with no one to look after her? She had terminal stomach cancer. She fell ill shortly after arriving, was rushed to the hospital, and passed away. She's long gone. My parents, however, were convinced that I was just colluding with the teacher to scam them. My father exploded with rage. That brat stopped studying and ran off to mess around. Tell her this: if she doesn't show up within 3 days, we're cutting her off completely. She won't see another dime of support from us. The teachers looked at each other, confused. What support? There hasn't been a single penny in her account for years. Where did she go? She's not in class during school hours. My parents kicked the dormitory door open, clearly agitated. The room was empty. The bed with my name tag was covered in thick layers of dust, making them cough uncontrollably. They quickly pulled Seraphina behind them for protection. Don't step inside. Don't let this disaster's filth infect you. The commotion was so loud that the dorm supervisor came upstairs, hands on her hips, and demanded to know what was going on. You're at the wrong place, aren't you? Only an orphan with no parents lives in this room. My mother curled her lip and let out a cold, sharp huff. You little liar. She must be out gallivanting with some man, not even bothering to come back to the dorm. My father agreed. What a disgrace to the family. If Seraphina wasn't sick, I wouldn't even have come to look for her. I'm humiliated. The supervisor stood there in a daze, silent for a long time before speaking.
She wasn't gallivanting.
She arrived with terminal stomach cancer. She couldn't afford treatment and passed away 3 years ago. They froze for a moment, then burst into mocking laughter.
Don't joke.
She was healthy as a horse. How could she have terminal cancer? How much did Alara pay you to lie to us? With that, my father shoved a few bills into the supervisor's hand. His eyes were filled with impatience. I don't care where she's hiding. Just tell her this: if she doesn't appear within 3 days, we're cutting her off. She won't get a single penny more. The supervisor rubbed the fresh, crisp banknotes and looked up, scanning my parents' expensive clothes and luxury watches. Such wealthy relatives. It's a shame you didn't show up 3 years ago. She shook her head with pity. That poor girl never used any support money. There wasn't a cent in her account. She couldn't even afford the cheapest painkillers. In her final moments, she was screaming for her mother and father, dying in agony. That was the truth. In my final moments, I was stripped of all hope, consumed by unbearable pain. I had become a wandering spirit. My parents dismissed the supervisor's words entirely. They rushed Seraphina back to the hospital, pulling every string to find a kidney, desperate to keep her alive. If they had spent even a fraction of that effort on me, they would have found my death certificate in seconds. But they didn't. Wasting half a day looking for their unfilial daughter was the greatest sacrifice they were willing to make. Seraphina was their precious treasure, the apple of their eye. As for me, I was the unwanted second child, a violation of family planning that had cost them their jobs, a walking disaster. So, I was supposed to accept their bias. 3 years ago, I got into a prestigious high school with top marks, and my parents finally started paying some attention to me. But before I could enjoy it, tragedy struck. Seraphina fell down the stairs at my birthday party and broke both her legs. Alara pushed me. She sobbed in my mother's arms, a flicker of cunning in her eyes, even though she had jumped herself. No one listened to my defense. My parents were furious and immediately canceled my high school enrollment. I was dumped into a boarding school. Seraphina was badly hurt, so they stayed by her side, not even taking me to register for school. When I tried to register, the teachers called my parents a dozen times. No one answered. Half a day later, my mother called back, sounding annoyed. My daughter is resting after surgery. Stop harassing us with your calls. I only have one daughter, Seraphina. I don't know who this Alara is. She hung up with a sharp click. The teachers looked at me with pity and marked me as without parents on my records. I wiped my tears and tried to swipe my card for tuition, but a cold, electronic voice sounded. Insufficient funds. No money, no love. I pushed myself to work part-time jobs everywhere to earn enough for tuition, but my body, damaged by poor nutrition, finally hit its limit. Terminal stomach cancer. It required a massive amount of money to treat, but my parents' numbers were always unreachable. The teachers, believing I was an orphan, organized a small donation, but it wasn't enough. Alone, I curled into a ball in the corner of the hospital room, the pain so sharp it felt like my bones were vibrating. I still held on to hope. My parents would come. I could still be saved. But in that endless wait, the pain eroded my nerves and death arrived in the silence. I was left to rot in a crowded ward with no one to visit me. Seraphina, meanwhile, enjoyed a private VIP suite, with doctors checking on her every day. I don't think my sister has forgiven me yet. Her eyes reddened, her voice trembling with manufactured hurt. I must have done something wrong to make her jealous. It's not her fault she pushed me down those stairs 3 years ago. My father was heartbroken. He wiped her dry face and said, "She bullied you so much, yet you're still trying to speak up for her. You're just too kind. Don't worry, Seraphina. We'll find that brat and make her donate her kidney to you." After gently soothing her, my father walked out of the room. His gaze turned ice cold as he pressed the call button. My name, Alara, flashed on the screen. The mechanical ringing echoed through the empty hallway, but I was already dead. Who was going to pick up? The 3-day deadline passed, and they found no trace of me. They returned to the school, angrier than before. How can you teachers act like this, helping a student pull such a twisted prank? My mother berated every teacher in sight, stamping her feet in frustration. My daughter's kidney condition is worsening. She can't wait. How much did Alara pay you? I'll pay double and no, 10 times that. The teachers were exhausted from explaining, and finally, someone slammed the table. It was my homeroom teacher, Mr. Miller. He had always felt sorry for me and had taken care of me the most when I was sick. Seeing my parents acting so arrogant, he lost his temper. Our school isn't perfect, but we wouldn't lie about life and death. You threw your child away and didn't care about her for years, and now you come here to cause a scene? Go back and check her medical records at the hospital. I had suffered from stomach pain for a long time. My medical records clearly documented every stage from ulcers to cancer. I had even cautiously handed those records to my parents, hoping they would take me to a major hospital for a real checkup. But they only found out that the painkillers I took were actually just vitamins. Seraphina had tugged on my father's sleeve and whimpered, "My sister is just trying to get your attention. That's why she's taking vitamins and faking an illness." They hugged her and, without even glancing at the documents, tore the medical records into pieces and threw them in my face. "You're so young and you've already learned to lie? If you bring us fake reports again, we're done with you." But the paleness of my face and the blood in my vomit were real. They chose not to see. After that day, I never mentioned my stomach pain to them again, until it was too late to turn back. Seeing that Mr. Miller was about to call security, the two of them stomped away in frustration. The hospital hallway was silent, and Seraphina was sleeping soundly. On her bedside table sat a small cupcake with a card. It was scrawled with shaky handwriting. "Mom and Dad, you've worked so hard. I'm sorry for all the trouble I've caused while being sick." Seeing their beloved daughter preparing a surprise despite her own illness, their frustration vanished. My mother wiped away tears. They say daughters are like little comfort quilts, and she truly is. My father nodded, but then he thought of me, his voice hardening. Seraphina is so obedient, unlike that disaster. She never gave us a moment of peace. Her own sister is dying, and she just plays disappearing games. They looked disgusted, but they couldn't stop thinking about what the teacher said. Check the medical records at the hospital. To check my records, they needed to prove they were my legal guardians. But 3 years ago, they had cruelly kicked me out and updated the household registration to include only the 3 of them. I had been kicked out, becoming the head of my own household by default. My mother rummaged through the drawers, slamming them shut in frustration. "Where is that curse's birth certificate? I can't find it. I must have thrown it away." My father held his nose and kicked open my old bedroom door, which had been converted into a storage closet filled with junk. He violently ripped open the nightstand drawer, but the documents weren't there. Instead, there was my diary. "Today I got a perfect score in math. Mom and Dad finally agreed to take me out. I'm so envious of my sister. I wish I had as many pretty clothes as she does." The closet was open. All my clothes were hanging there. They were sparse, taking up only half the rack. Mom always calls me a disaster. I'll study hard, and when I grow up, I'll make money to bring them luck. Will they stop yelling at me then? The diary pages were wrinkled, stained with teardrops. They were engrossed in it when their phones suddenly rang, the hospital calling to say Seraphina had fallen into a coma. They rushed off, tossing my diary into the pile of junk. They sprinted to the hospital. Seraphina wasn't in her room, so they panted their way to the surgery unit, collapsing against the wall only after the doctor confirmed she was stable. Emergency intervention was successful. She's not in immediate danger, but she needs to stay in observation for a few days. The doctor looked worried and urged them again to find a kidney donor quickly. My father nodded like a woodpecker and privately sent more money to the private investigators. Whatever it took, they had to find me. The next day, instead of the investigators, an unwelcome guest arrived. It was Mr. Miller, carrying a thick stack of files. Stop looking. Seeing the luxurious environment of the VIP room, he felt a sting of memory, thinking of the lonely girl I used to be. I had been stuck in a crowded ward with no money and no care. How could this compare to the VIP life Seraphina led? He wiped his eyes and spoke slowly. These are the medical records I collected for Alara. And her death certificate. The evidence is all here. Just leave Alara in peace. I floated in the air, quietly watching their reactions. The death certificate with the hospital's red seal was on top. It couldn't be faked. It was undeniable proof. Rear up. The sound shattered the silence. My father, not caring at all, tore the death certificate into shreds and threw them in Mr. Miller's face. You're just like Alara, a complete fraud. She used fake medical records to scam us before, and now you're forging a death certificate? Even now, they would rather believe I was a mastermind capable of pulling strings with teachers than admit I had actually died of illness. We have proof that she's lying. Everyone held their breath, and I leaned in too. What proof could they possibly have that I was alive? My father hooked the corner of his mouth into a mocking smirk, confident he had me cornered. He pulled out his phone, swiped a few times, and showed it to Mr. Miller with a sneer. It was a series of bank deduction notifications. Look, the bank card I used to send Alara her monthly allowance is still showing withdrawals. How could a dead person spend money? Mr. Miller froze and stumbled back a few steps. I stayed where I was, staring blankly at the phone screen, finally seeing the last 4 digits of the bank card in the message. The card my father was depositing money into wasn't mine at all. No wonder he never believed I was dead. No wonder I never received a single cent of his support. But that's not right. I paid for her medical bills. Her card was… My mother cut him off with a scream. You've been scammed by her tricks. Tell Alara. Her lying has gone too far this time. We're canceling her card immediately. If she wants to redeem herself, she better come back and donate her kidney to Seraphina. The nurse wheeled Seraphina out of observation, and my parents, ignoring Mr. Miller, rushed to her bedside. They followed her back to the room like shadows. Seraphina had been in a coma all night, and they had stayed awake with her. Their eyes were rimmed with dark circles, but they refused to sleep. They truly loved her. I stayed nearby, watching the 3 of them holding hands tightly. I had craved this warmth my entire life, but it was something I would never have. As Seraphina's complexion turned from pale to rosy, my parents finally smiled. Mom, Dad, I'm sorry for being such a burden. She coughed a few times and looked around. Where's my sister? Did you find her? My parents' eyes filled with guilt as they squeezed her hand. Not yet, but we've hired private investigators. Your mother and I have frozen her bank account. I'm sure she'll come crawling back to beg for our help in a few days. Hearing that they had frozen the account, Seraphina suddenly panicked and struggled to sit up.
No.
It can't be easy for her out there. Please, don't cancel her card. My mother gently stroked her hair and helped her lie back down. I know you're kind, but your health is what matters now. Don't plead for Alara anymore.
Exactly.
You care about her so much, but does she care about you? My father snorted as he tucked the blanket around her. Even though it was the peak of summer, the air felt like a cold, sharp blade to me. Resentment, fury, and injustice intertwined, binding my heart so tightly I couldn't breathe. The bank account had been frozen for days, yet they still had no word from me. Finally, the private investigator led them to a place. The columbarium in the funeral home. Mr. and Mrs. Sterling. The investigator shook his head helplessly. This is what I found regarding Alara. She died of a terminal illness 3 years ago. No one claimed her body, so after cremation, it was stored here in the public facility. My father stood frozen, unable to move. After a long silence, my mother's shaking hand finally reached out to take the heavy urn. Her pupils dilated, her face a mask of gray despair. It's impossible. How could she really be dead? Still refusing to accept reality, they both took out their phones and dialed my number. The result was the same as always. No matter how they called, I would never respond. My father tugged at his hair, incoherent, unable to voice his thoughts. My mother was already weeping, hugging the urn, clenching her teeth to keep from screaming. I don't believe she's dead. If she's really dead, what happens to Seraphina's kidney? My spirit froze, and I felt a bitter, mocking smile pull at my lips. So, when I died, their biggest concern was the kidney for my sister. Without taking a moment to grieve for me, they were bombarded by more calls from the hospital. They assumed Seraphina was in trouble, so they tossed my urn aside without a second thought. Is it Seraphina?
No.
Someone is causing a scene in her room. In the hospital room, a man was surrounded by security, his mouth spewing obscenities. Seraphina was terrified, shivering under her blankets. When she saw my parents, she grew even more desperate, screaming through her coughing fit. Quick, get him out of here. The man spat on the floor and shoved the security guards aside, pointing directly at Seraphina's nose. Seraphina, you backtracked on your word. We had a deal. I swapped your sister's stomach medication for vitamins, and you were supposed to pay into that bank account every month. Why is the card frozen now? Explain yourself. The news was so sudden that my father, unsteady on his feet, nearly collapsed. What vitamins? How did you get her card? The man realized he had slipped up and started to stammer. But the police were already at the door, giving him no chance to hesitate. Seraphina gave me the card. She told me there would be money deposited every month for me to spend as I pleased. As for the vitamins, the truth, which they never admitted and never dared to admit, began to unravel. The man was the owner of the pharmacy downstairs. Back then, when my stomach hurt and I was broke, I could only afford his cheap, ineffective meds. I thought I was just getting what I paid for. Even after my parents claimed my painkillers were vitamins, I was suspicious. I suspected my sister. I suspected my parents, but I never once suspected the source of the medicine. No wonder my stomach disease had grown so deadly. My parents watched in a daze as the man was taken away by the police, and they looked at Seraphina, who was sobbing uncontrollably on the bed. Mom, Dad, it's not like that. Alara must have bribed him to frame me. Seraphina's eyes were filled with tears, her hands gripping their sleeves, shaking. She looked pathetic, then broke into a violent coughing fit. In the past, my parents would have rushed to fetch water and comfort her. But now, they sat motionless, their eyes hollow, staring straight ahead. Their expressions were icy, and they looked 10 years older in an instant. Seraphina, you have disappointed us too much. The silence in the VIP suite was heavy, smelling of sterile bleach and expensive lilies. For 3 years, Richard and Evelyn Sterling had lived in a carefully constructed reality where they were the tragic, long-suffering parents of a perfect, fragile angel and the victims of a rebellious, ungrateful second
Child.
Now, that reality lay in shards on the linoleum floor. Mom, Dad. Seraphina's voice was a thin, trembling whistle. She reached out, her fingers twitching like pale spiders against the silk sheets.
He's
lying. You know how people are. They see we have money and they try to blackmail us. Alara must have planned this.
She always hated me.
She's probably paying him from whatever corner she's hiding in. Richard did not move to grasp her hand. For the first time in his life, his hand remained clamped at his side, his knuckles white. He looked down at his daughter, the girl he had shielded from every harsh draft, the girl for whom he had ruined his other daughter's life, and felt a cold, oily wave of disgust.
How?
Richard's voice was barely a whisper, yet it cut through the room like a rusty blade. Daddy, please. How did he get the bank card, Seraphina? Richard stepped closer, his shadow falling over her bed. The bank account was tied to Alara's name, but the alerts went to my phone. I set it up years ago when she first started boarding school. I thought I was sending her 5,000 yuan a month to keep her quiet and out of our sight. But the withdrawals, they weren't made from the boarding school's town. They were made from the ATM right down the street from this very hospital. He pulled out his phone, his thumb shaking so violently he almost dropped it. He scrolled to the transaction history. Every month, on the 15th, the exact day the allowance was deposited, it was cleared out by him. He pointed a trembling finger at the door where the police had just dragged Mr. Harris away. And you told us you needed extra pocket money for your rehabilitation treatment. We gave you our cards, but you used Alara's instead. Why? Evelyn fell to her knees beside the bed, but she didn't reach for Seraphina. Instead, she clutched her own temples, her manicured nails digging into her scalp until her skin turned red. The stomach medicine, she whispered, her voice cracking. The bills, when Alara brought us those papers, she was crying. She was throwing up blood in the bathroom, Richard. Do you remember? She was curled up on the cold tile. And I told her she was acting. I told her she was trying to steal the spotlight from Seraphina's broken legs. A memory, sharp and agonizing, pierced through Evelyn's denial. 3 years ago, a rainy Tuesday, Alara had stood in the doorway of their grand living room, dripping wet, holding a crumpled yellow folder from the district hospital. Her face was the color of curdled milk, her lips blue. "Mom, please," she had whispered. "The doctor says it's an ulcer, but it's getting worse.
The
Pain. I can't sleep. I need to go to the city hospital. I need help." Evelyn had been busy sewing a custom lace trim onto Seraphina's wheelchair blanket.
she
Hadn't even looked up. If you have time to make up stories, you have time to clean your room. Seraphina's legs are still healing because of you. Don't speak to me about pain. When Alara kept begging, Seraphina had started crying, claiming the tension was making her surgical scars ache. Richard had snatched the folder from Alara's hand, torn it into quarters, and thrown it into the fireplace. "Get out," he had roared. "Go back to your school and don't come back until you learn some humility." Hovering near the ceiling, my spirit watched them. It was a strange sensation. I felt no satisfaction, only a profound, hollow emptiness. I watched my mother weep, her tears ruining her expensive makeup, and my father aged 10 years in 10 seconds. I wanted to scream at them. Why now?
why?
Does it take a stranger's confession for you to see what was right in front of your eyes? But spirits have no voice. I was merely a lingering echo of a girl who had died in a crowded, noisy charity ward, gasping for air that wouldn't come. "Richard," Evelyn gasped, grabbing her husband's trousers. "The urn. We left her." Richard's eyes widened. The realization hit him like a physical blow. In their haste to answer the hospital's emergency call, they had set the heavy, cold urn of their deceased daughter on a plastic bench in the funeral home's dusty hallway. They had abandoned her. Again. Without a word to Seraphina, Richard turned on his heel and sprinted out of the room. Evelyn scrambled to her feet, her heels clicking frantically on the floor. As she chased after him, leaving Seraphina alone in the vast, quiet luxury of her VIP suite.
Mom, Dad, don't leave me.
Seraphina screamed behind them, her voice cracking into a desperate, ugly screech. "I'm the one who's sick. I'm the one who needs you. You can't leave me for a dead person." But the heavy door swung shut, muffling her cries. The drive back to the funeral home was a nightmare of running red lights and deafening silence. Richard gripped the steering wheel so hard his palms bled from where his fingernails dug in. Evelyn stared out the window, her lips moving in silent, frantic prayers. When they burst through the doors of the public columbarium, the air was cool and smelled of incense and old paper. "Where is she?" Evelyn screamed at the front desk clerk, a young man who was startled out of his doze. "The urn. The small, gray one. We left it on the bench." The clerk blinked, frowning. "Ma'am, this is a sanctuary. Please keep your voice
Down.
What bench?" Richard ran down the corridor, his expensive leather shoes squeaking loudly.
He
Reached the row of plastic chairs where they had been sitting only hours before. The bench was empty. "No, no, no," Richard muttered, dropping to his knees and searching underneath. "The chairs. It was here. We put it right here." It was a gray ceramic urn. Simple. No engravings. "Are you the family of Alara Sterling?" They turned to see an elderly custodian holding a plastic trash bag and a broom. He looked at them with a mixture of pity and disgust. "We are her parents," Evelyn cried, lunging forward. "Where's she? Where is our daughter?" "You left her on the bench," the custodian said flatly. "In a place like this, abandoned items are kept in the lost and found locker for 12 hours. If no one claims them, we assume they were discarded. Many poor families leave urns here because they can't afford the storage fees, hoping we'll bury the ashes in the public plot." "We're not poor," Richard roared, his face flushed. "We have millions. We can buy this entire facility." "Then it's even more shameful that you left her on a bench," the custodian replied, his voice dry as dust. He walked to a metal cabinet near the back corner, unlocked it with a rusty key, and pulled out the plain gray jar. He didn't hand it to them. He set it carefully on a table. Evelyn threw herself over the urn, cradling the cold ceramic against her chest. She sobbed, a guttural, animalistic sound that echoed off the tiled walls.
I'm
"Sorry, Alara.
I'm so sorry.
Mommy's here. Mommy's holding you." I floated closer, looking down at the woman who had refused to hug me when I was alive because I smelled of sweat and cheap soap from my part-time jobs.
Now
She was hugging a jar of my ashes, getting gray dust all over her silk blouse. It was too late. The ashes didn't feel her warmth. I didn't feel her love. Richard stood over them, his shoulders shaking. He reached out to touch the urn, but his hand hovered, trembling, as if he feared the ceramic would burn him. "We need to take her home," Richard whispered. "We'll build her a proper shrine. The best marble. We'll hire a priest." "A shrine?" The voice was cold, sharp, and entirely devoid of respect. They turned to see Mr. Miller standing at the entrance of the corridor.
He
Looked exhausted, his eyes bloodshot behind his thick glasses. In his hand, he held a plastic folder, the same one Richard had torn up earlier in the hospital. He had taped the pieces of Alara's death certificate back together. "Mr. Miller," Richard said, his tone defensive but desperate. We didn't.
No.
We were deceived by Seraphina. She swapped the medicine." "You didn't know?" Mr. Miller let out a hollow laugh. "You didn't know because you didn't want to know. It was easier to believe Alara was a liar than to admit. You were terrible parents. It was cheaper, too." He walked over and slapped the taped death certificate onto the table next to the urn. "Look at the date of death," Mr. Miller commanded. Richard's eyes flickered down to the paper. Date of death, October 14th, 2023. Cause of death, gastric adenocarcinoma, stage 4. Place of death, City 3rd People's Hospital, Ward 4, Bed 12. "Do you know what day that was?" Mr. Miller asked, his voice shaking with suppressed rage. "That was the day of the city business gala. I remember seeing your faces in the local newspaper. You were standing on a red carpet holding Seraphina between you. She was in a custom-made wheelchair, wearing a diamond
tiara.
You were giving a speech about family values and resilience while your other daughter was drowning in her own blood, suffocating in a room with 12 other dying people." Evelyn let out a sharp, choked gasp, burying her face in the urn. "She didn't even have a blanket of her own," Mr. Miller continued, his eyes drilling into Richard. "The hospital ran out of clean linens that night. I had to bring an old quilt from my own home to cover her feet. She was so cold, Mr. Sterling. Her toes were completely blue."
And do you know what she said to me?
"Before she lost consciousness." Richard couldn't speak. He could only stare at the teacher, his mouth slightly open, tears streaming down his face. "She asked me if the fireplace at home was lit," Mr. Miller whispered.
She
"Said, 'My papers are in the fire. It must be warm there.' She thought you burned her medical records because you wanted her to be warm." The silence that followed was suffocating. I remembered that night. The ward had smelled of old soup, urine, and the metallic tang of blood. My chest had felt as though a heavy stone was sitting on it, and every breath was a battle. I had kept my eyes fixed on the ceiling, imagining the bright, crackling fire in our living room. I had forgotten the anger. I had forgotten the unfairness. In my final moments, my brain, starved of oxygen, had only wanted the warmth of a home I never truly had. Richard collapsed onto a plastic chair, hiding his face in his hands. He wept, openly, his loud, ugly sobs echoing through the quiet columbarium. "We killed her," he whispered. "We killed our own daughter." "Yes," Mr. Miller said, his voice flat and unforgiving.
You did.
"And now you want to build her a marble shrine? To ease your own guilt? Don't insult her memory. Leave her here. Or better yet, scatter her in the wind. She's spent her whole life trapped by your expectations and your neglect. Don't trap her in a expensive stone box now." The police did not take long to build a case, with Mr. Harris, the pharmacy owner, singing like a canary to avoid a heavy sentence. The truth about Seraphina's little empire began to surface. It turned out that Seraphina's malice was not a sudden impulse. It was a calculated lifestyle. The police searched the Sterling residence, focusing on Seraphina's room. Underneath her plush, custom-built pink vanity, they found a hidden compartment. Inside was a diary of her own, alongside several prepaid burner phones and a ledger. Richard and Evelyn sat in the police station's interrogation observation room, watching through the one-way mirror as a stern detective laid the items out in front of Seraphina, who was now sitting in a standard wheelchair, stripped of her VIP luxury. "Seraphina Sterling," the detective said, his voice echoing through the speaker. "In the observation room. Let's talk about the bank account. Mr. Harris has provided us with text messages dating back 4 years.
You approached him when
You were 14. Why?" Seraphina stared at her lap, her face pale but her jaw set in a stubborn, angry
line.
"I don't know what you're talking about." The detective opened a folder and pulled out printed screenshots of text. Messages. Sender, Seraphina, she's complaining about her stomach again. She bought some pain pills from your shop.
Swap them.
Give her the fake ones. I'll make sure you
Get paid.
Receiver, Harris kid, this is prescription stuff. If she's really sick, she could get worse. Sender, Seraphina, she's faking. She just wants my parents' attention. Do it, or I'll tell my dad your shop is selling expired baby
Formula.
He has lawyers. In the observation room, Evelyn let out a choked cry, covering her mouth with her hands. No, no, she was just a child. How could she think like that? The detective in the interrogation room pressed on. And the money? You paid Mr. Harris 500 yuan a month to keep swapping the medicine. The rest of Alara's 5,000 yuan allowance. Where did it go? He opened the ledger found under her vanity. A premium gaming computer, designer handbags, rare collectibles for your
Friends.
You were running a microloan scheme at your private middle school, using your sister's allowance as capital. The detective leaned forward, his eyes cold. Your sister was working 12-hour shifts at a convenience store to pay for her tuition and food while you were playing venture capitalist with her. Blood money. She didn't deserve that money. Seraphina suddenly screamed, her delicate facade shattering. She slammed her hands onto the metal table, her eyes wild and bloodshot. She was a mistake. You don't know what it was like.
Before she was
Born, mom and dad loved me. But then she came, and because she got perfect grades, they started looking at her. They started talking about sending her to university abroad.
What about me?
I'm the eldest. I was supposed to be the star. So, you pushed yourself down the stairs? The detective asked calmly. I didn't push myself. I tripped, and then I realized when I was hurt, they didn't care about her grades anymore. They only cared about me. Seraphina let out a shrill, hysterical laugh. It was so easy. All I had to do was cry, and they threw her out. When she got sick, she tried to use it to get back into the house. I couldn't let her. If she came back, they'd realize she was smarter, healthier, better than me. So I made sure she stayed sick. She looked directly at the one-way mirror, as if she knew her parents were standing on the other side. And they helped me, she shrieked, her face twisting into a hideous mask of
spite.
They did it themselves. I didn't have to force them to ignore her.
I
just gave them an excuse, and they ran with it. They wanted to get rid of her, just as much as I did. They hated her because she was a reminder of their financial loss when they got fined for having a second child. Don't put this all on me. They're murderers too. Outside, Richard felt his knees give way. He slid down the wall of the observation room, his head in his hands, dry heaving onto the polished floor. He wanted to deny it. He wanted to scream that he loved both his daughters.
But
the mirror didn't lie. Seraphina's words, monstrous as they were, held a mirror to his own soul. They had used Seraphina's fragility as a convenient shield to justify their own resentment toward the child who had cost them their prestigious government jobs years ago. Alara's existence had been a constant, quiet accusation of their failure, and they had punished her for it every single day. The law is a cold machine. It does not care about family tragedies, only facts. Because Seraphina was a minor when the pharmacy deal began, and because Mr. Harris was the adult who actually executed the drug tampering, the legal charges were complex. However, the public outrage was simple and devastating. The story leaked. A local investigative journalist, tipped off by Mr. Miller, published a long, detailed article titled, "The Price of a Second Child: How a Wealthy Family Ignored One Daughter to Death While Funding Her Sister's Luxury." Within 48 hours, the Sterling family name was dragged through the mud. Richard's business partners pulled out of their contracts. The luxury real estate firm he owned faced mass boycotts. The stock price of his holdings plummeted. But the financial ruin was nothing compared to the silence that settled over their grand mansion. They didn't sell the house, but they ceased to live in it. It became a mausoleum. Evelyn spent her days in Alara's old room, the storage closet. She had dragged all the junk out into the hallway and replaced it with a simple wooden table. On the table sat the gray ceramic urn. Evelyn had cleaned the room until her fingers bled from the scrubbing brush, trying to wash away the years of dust and neglect. She bought the cheapest, most ordinary clothes similar to the ones Alara used to wear and hung them neatly in the closet. She sat on the floor, reading Alara's diary over and over again until she had memorized every single word. October 12th, Evelyn whispered to the empty room, her voice hoarse and hollow. Today, the wind was very strong. I lost my glove on the way to work. My hands were so cold I couldn't hold the pen during the exam. But I got a 98. I hope if I show Mom, she'll let me have dinner at the table with them. Tonight. Evelyn pressed the diary to her chest, rocking back and forth. We ate crab that night, she sobbed. We had imported king crab. Seraphina wanted it. We threw the shells in the trash. We didn't save any for her.
She
Stayed in her room. She didn't even have a glove. Richard, meanwhile, had become a ghost in his own right. He refused to shave or cut his hair. He spent his days sitting in the hospital hallway of the City Third People's Hospital, not the VIP wing where Seraphina used to be, but the chaotic, overcrowded charity ward where Alara had died. He would sit on the metal bench for hours, watching the patients. Whenever he saw a young girl who looked pale or thin, he would lung forward, offering them thick envelopes of cash. Please, he would beg, his voice cracking, his eyes wide and desperate.
take it.
Go to the private clinic.
Get the scan.
Don't take the cheap medicine. Please, I have money. Just take it. Most of the patients, terrified by the disheveled, wild-eyed man, would shrink away or call security. The guards, who eventually came to know him as the mad millionaire, would gently lead him out of the building. But the next day, he would return, sitting in the corner, clutching a leather briefcase full of money that could no longer buy his daughter's life. While her parents drowned in their guilt, Seraphina's body was keeping score. Without the VIP care, the private doctors, and the expensive experimental treatments that her parents' money had previously secured, her kidney condition deteriorated rapidly. She was moved to a public ward in a municipal hospital. Her skin turned a sickly yellow-gray, her eyes sunken and rimmed with purple. The cunning, arrogant girl who had manipulated her entire family was gone, replaced by a terrified, fragile creature who was terrified of dying. One afternoon, Richard and Evelyn were summoned to the hospital by her primary physician. They stood at the foot of her bed, looking at her with cold, empty eyes. There was no hatred in their gaze, only a profound, dead indifference. Mr. and Mrs. Sterling, the doctor said, looking over his clipboard. Seraphina's kidney function is below 10%. She is currently on dialysis, but her body is rejecting the treatment. If she does not receive a transplant within the next 2 weeks, she will go into multi-organ failure. Seraphina looked up from her pillows, her eyes filling with tears. Mom, Dad, please.
I don't want to die. I'm sorry.
I was bad, but I'm your daughter. You have to save me. She reached out, her yellowed hand shaking. Dad, you're a match.
The doctors
Checked your files from years ago. You can give me one of your kidneys. You have
2.
Please, Daddy. Richard looked down at his daughter. For 3 years, he had believed that his purpose in life was to protect this
girl.
He had sacrificed his career, his reputation, and his other daughter for her. He looked at his own hand, then at hers. No, Richard said. The word was quiet, but it fell like a guillotine. Seraphina froze.
What?
Daddy, what do you mean? You're my dad. You have 2. I am not your father, Richard said, his voice completely flat. The father who loved you died when he realized what you did to Alara. The man standing here is just a shadow. Evelyn, Seraphina shrieked, turning to her mother.
Mom.
Talk to him. He'll listen to you. I'm your baby. You held me when my legs were broken. Evelyn didn't look at her. She was staring at the window, watching a sparrow sit on the sill. Your legs were never broken, Seraphina, Evelyn said softly. We checked the old x-rays from the private clinic. You paid the technician to put Alara's name on a clear scan and you used a fake cast. You made us hate her for a lie. I was a child. Seraphina sobbed, her voice rising to a frantic, wet scream. I didn't know any better. You can't let me die. It's murder. No, Richard said, turning his back to her. It is not murder. It is simply letting nature take its course, just like we did with Alara. You monsters, Seraphina screamed, thrashing in her bed, her dialysis lines rattling against the metal frame. You're going to let me die. I hate you. I hate both of you. I wish Alara had never been born. As they walked out of the room, her screams followed them down the hallway, getting fainter and fainter until they were swallowed by the hum of the hospital machines. On a crisp, cold autumn morning, Richard and Evelyn drove to the top of a hill overlooking the city boarding school. It was the same hill where Alara used to sit during her short lunch breaks, looking down at the school she had worked so hard to enter, only to be turned away at the gates of her dreams. Evelyn held the gray ceramic urn in her arms. She had removed the lid. Mr. Miller stood a few paces behind them, his coat collar turned up against the
Wind.
He was the only guest. Is this what she would have wanted? Richard asked, his voice barely louder than the breeze. She wanted to go to university, Mr. Miller said quietly. She wanted to study literature. She told me once that she wanted to write books so that people who were lonely could read them and feel like they had a friend. She didn't want to be trapped in the city. Evelyn reached into the urn, her hand coming out covered in fine, pale gray ash. She looked at her husband, her eyes hollow and dead. We never gave her anything, Evelyn whispered. Let's give her this. She tilted the urn into the wind. The white-gray powder caught the draft, rising into the cold air like a flock of pale birds. It swirled over the school, over the pine trees, and up toward the vast, clear blue sky, scattering until it was completely invisible. I felt a sudden, strange sensation of weightlessness. The resentment that had anchored me to this earth, the cold fury that had bound my chest began to dissolve. I looked down at the two miserable, broken people, weeping on the hillside. They had their wealth, their grand house, and their freedom, but they were more imprisoned than I had ever been. They would live the rest of their lives in a self-made purgatory, haunted by the ghost of a daughter they couldn't buy back, while the daughter they had pampered rotted away in a hospital bed, lonely and unmourned. They didn't need my curse. Their own guilt was a sentence far worse than any spirit could inflict. The wind caught me, pulling me upward, away from the hill, away from the city, and into the warm, bright light that I had waited 3 long years to see. For the first time since my birthday party, the pain in my stomach was completely gone. I was warm. I was free.